And today we have a hybrid system. So some of you are here in this room, in Rafflesia room, and some others are in the Zoom room. Also, thank you for everybody who's already joined in the Zoom room. My name is Ani Mardiastuti, and I'm delighted to be here as the moderator for our speaker, Bea. This is Dr. Bea Mas. But before we... ada yang ini bukan feedback? Yeah. Okay. But before that, I would like also to, barangkali sudah pada kenal ya, tapi tetap aja I would like to introduce my colleague, my friend, Professor Damayanti Bukhori. She is the head of the chairperson of the CTSS. What is CTSS? I think she will give you some explanation about that. So, because actually the host of this event is CTSS and our Department of Wildlife Conservation and Ecotourism, Forest Resources Conservation and Ecotourism. So, really sorry because it's so long. The name, nama departemennya terlalu panjang, jadi sering kita lupa. Okay, now it's time for Ibu Dami.
Okay.
Go ahead. You have the floor.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, first of all, I would like to thank you to Ibu. I want to thank Ibu Ani, Professor Ani, for hosting this, and also to Ibu Miki and also Ibu Yeni. So I would like, well, if they call among themselves the three diva, I always said that I wish I can be the fourth diva. I want to be part of that. So anyway, I'm from the Department of Plant Protection, and also I'm, as Bu Ani said, I'm chair of the Center for Transdisciplinary and Sustainability Science. A bit too long. And in CTSS, we have a graduate student seminar on sustainability. So we call it GSSS or something. Yeah, Graduate Student Seminar on Sustainability. Yeah, GS3, that's it. And so we usually like to invite scientists, people from across discipline, because our focus is on transdisciplinarity and sustainability. So when Dr. Bea Mas emailed me that she's coming to Indonesia, I thought, oh my, Bea is a very, very long friend, an old friend, a long time ago. She was a student and I was already a lecturer, so you can imagine how old I am, because now
You're mature, not old.
Mature. So it's really, I'm very happy to see the growth of Bea, and now she's a famous scientist.
Thank you. For the people who haven't heard this one in Zoom, I just want to ask the audience in Zoom also, maybe someone can write in the chat if you can hear me. That would be nice. And I think that you also see the slides. A short feedback would be amazing. However, I just repeat this in 2 sentences. This is a slide here showing in a nutshell what we do. So we study biodiversity and the associated ecosystem functions. We mainly focus on pest control here. Then we try to link this evidence into some applications, and through a lot of communication, we always aim to implement the scientific theory into management practice to support sustainable development of landscapes. This is basically what we do. Then I can't continue with this tool, but next, yeah. And then I mentioned that I've been coming from conservation biology through my studies and my master. But then I came into agroforestry with my PhD. You see a world map here with Indonesia marked in green, already showing the tremendous diversity we can find in this country due to also these geographic isolations we have between the 17,500 islands, and it's also volcanic hotspot, as you all know, centered in the Ring of Fire. So this is creates such a mega diversity in the country. Next, please, or can I? the possibility. Yeah, me, no, I can do, yeah, perfect. It's better, I can do it myself. So we're not only in a biodiversity hotspot, Indonesia is also the third largest producer of a global cash crop we all know, cacao. Many people don't know this. And this combination of being a biodiversity hotspot and one of the largest producer of a global cash crop worldwide makes this a very interesting area to study how land use changes are affecting biodiversity, especially in the tropics. Plus, I was working in Sulawesi, inside Indonesia, one of the largest producer of cacao, and also part of the Wallacea area, an outstanding international hotspot of biodiversity, and like the biogeographic intermediate zone between Southeast Asian and Oceanic, Australian flora and fauna. So very, very special, not as species rich as many tropical countries, but instead very rich in endemic species. So for example, bird species, 30% of them more or less are endemic only to Sulawesi, which means they only occur Sulawesi and the satellite islands and nowhere else in the world. Super impressive, and similar for bats, although we also know that we don't know so much about the bats. There have been many studies. I find this one really interesting and clear also, where, for example, Bagwat and colleagues studied in 2008 how many mammals occur in agroforestry systems, and they find a 65% similarity, for example, between a primary rainforest and the agroforestry system regards for mammals. They also find really high numbers, like 61%, 52%, 49% for bats, birds, and insects. You see the number of studies they have taken into account for this and the ranges. So this is really interesting. We see that agroforestry systems, such as cacao in Indonesia, have high potential to contribute to the conservation of biodiversity and to the associated services that we vitally depend on in our well-being. Because without pest control, we get into troubles basically with food security, and there are different categories of ecosystem services, such as the provisioning services and the regulating services that keep the ecosystems and the life as we know it going, but up to cultural services that often cannot be so easily assessed in terms of money, because it's very individual too, but we all need some kind of recreational value from nature. So cacao has a huge potential, obviously, when you think, compared to many other when you think of a tomato plantation, for example, it's structurally much more simple. Only because the cacao is a tree and has this vertical structure that offers maybe nesting sites for birds and all kinds of different levels, it has the potential to contribute to this conservation and sustainable management, but of course, depending on the management of this cacao, because you can have cacao super sustainable, so to say, with many different shade trees inside. Here you see a farm, and what I always have to explain to people in Austria, maybe not to you, but I say it anyway, the cacao tree is only the layer down here. And all this is shade tree. We can see that the shade tree canopy here is quite monotonous. So this is more or less only one shade tree species, probably gamal atau dadap, so the two most common species, usually leguminosa tree species. We see one huge sugar palm in front, maybe as a symbol of the diversity of shade trees that we could have here. And, really nice example of a tree that is used from start to end 100%. So cacao, we could cut off all the shade trees and create a short profit, which in the cacao industry is also, and biodiversity as well, is known as boom and bust cycles, as published by Jan Clough and colleagues here in 2009, which we see in many countries in the world. They got the data, for example, in Brazil. So what's usually happening in the tropics, that the primary rainforest is cut or burned down to plant the cacao seedlings. The cacao plant is originally from the Amazon jungle. So it's a tree that's from the understory, and it vitally needs shade. It gets high physiological stress when it doesn't get shade. So it needs this, the small cacao seedlings need the shade trees that are planted in the rainforest margin now, for example. And then these industries, the big industries, they put a lot of agrochemicals, including fertilizers, herbicides, pesticides, to push the production, pushing it in a short time as much as they can. And then at some point, they make it to a full sun cacao system. So they cut the shade trees. But in the moment when the shade trees are cut, the cacao tree, originally from the understory in the Amazon, starts like a dying process. So it has really high physiological stress. And what does a plant, also animal, do when it's like is threatened with the final day? They want to leave as much genes behind as they can. So again, this is pushing the production, and this is these peaks that you usually see in the end, in these production peaks. Then other stories like from Malaysia. So cacao has been transferred all over the world. The largest producer is not in the origin today in the Amazon, but actually Ivory Coast, Ghana, and Africa are the #1 producers. Then you find the second largest producers in Brazil today, and third largest producer in Indonesia. And then you see stories like in Malaysia, where cacao has been transferred to an area where it's not originally from. And some insects, such as the Conopomorphos species in Malaysia, detect cacao as a new source and become a main pest. And then also you can get in trouble with this. In 2009-10, when I started my PhD on biodiversity in cacao, we have been somewhere here in Indonesia. And the big question was like, can we prevent a bust cycle coming after this boom cycle? Can we think of more sustainable approach to this cacao movement? In particular, we wanted to know what are the effects of the ongoing land use expansion, the cutting of the rainforest, and the ongoing intensification of this land on biodiversity. What is the impact of flying vertebrates, and this birds and bats, on the crop production? And what are the influences of the local and landscape factors on these interactions between birds, bats? Because in the end, we want to manage, we have to understand the management, including how the landscape is affecting it and how the local management is affected. This becomes really complex. Definitely something you cannot study in the lab. You need to go to the field. You cannot recreate these kind of systems in the laboratory, no? So we studied birds, bats, and cacao. This is the header here. And in particular, we wanted to know how high is the diversity of these species? What are their effects on the arthropods? And you know, the cacao tree, we dared also to ask the question, is there even an effect of the birds and the bats on the field? And this was like a quite demanding question, because, you know, cacao is cauliflorous and cauli-carp, so the flowers and the fruit, they grow on the stems everywhere, stem and on all branches over the tree, not only. And then the cacao pods be really large. You have the fleshy white fruit pulp inside, which is really heavy, contains a lot of water, and inside that pulp you have the bean chocolate. And what we wanted to know, if there's effect on the actual product that is sold on the market, so these dried beans. And when you think of one cacao tree, one harvest, you have maybe like small handful of beans, which is really, really light. So being able to measure an effect of a bird that eats an insect that could have been a pest, but doesn't because the bird has been eating it, and a measuring effect on if there are more or less beans, this is really exciting. If you find an effect, they definitely have a huge contribution, no? Next, yeah. So the study area was in Sulawesi Tengah in central Sulawesi. We, with a long process, we picked 15 cacao farms that were like not correlating, but independent in the distance to the primary forest and in their local shade. Basically, we had low shade, medium shade, really high shade to compare this effect. And we had farms that were very close to the forest margin or up to 3 kilometers far from it, also the effects of forest proximity. And then I said, you can't do it in the laboratory. So basically, we're asking a question here of what happens in the future if we go on like this, with a land use strategy like this. We already see birds and bats and insects are lost. They are disappearing in the landscape. So we take the moment that we have now, the now here was 2008, and establish an experiment where we exclude the birds and the bats. So this is a bamboo cage what you can't see, the bamboo cage is surrounded by a fishing net with a mesh size, just large enough to still, that the insects can pass. But the mesh size is small enough that when you close this cage, birds and bats are excluded. So we simulate a future without the birds and bats and see what happens to the trees. On each of these 15 farms, we have 4 of these cages. One of this cage is only open in the day, but we closed it every single evening. So 15 cages on every 15 cages we were closing every single evening. A second cage on each farm is the other way around. It's closed in the very early morning, so we're excluding mainly birds or the day active flying up vertebrates, and then it's opened in the evening again to give bats access. And distinguish even between the day active and night active. I make it short and say birds and bats here because the night active birds include 1 owl species here. We had a cage that was always closed to see the effect and not assume similarly that this 1 + 2 is 3, no? And we have one cage that is always open, of course, it's the business as usual. So we have this experiment 1, 2, and 3 on each farm, and we compare what is happening to this future scenario we're creating compared to the business as usual on the farm. We did this for 2 years in a row, opening and closing cages every studying the birds, the bats, the cacao from counting the flowers, 3,000 on one tree, from the flowers to the final harvest, to the beans. Yeah, studying the day active arthropods, the night active arthropods as well, leaf herbivory, and much more. I focus on the most important results only. Here, so 2 years of data collection, the full life cycle. So we compare this control, this business as usual, against the experiment, right? Here you see the statistical result. So this is based on mixed linear models, and you basically see the mean. So what happened in every experiment, and you see a 0 level. We assume 0 is the control, and here we see what happens with the cacao yield, the harvest, the beans. And it doesn't seem, maybe visually doesn't seem like a huge effect, statistically a huge effect, because the 95% confidence interval is not crossing the 0 line, means this is, and even visually here and here, so it's highly significant. Like this is like a p-value of less than 0.004, and here's also highly significant. The effect of the day exclusion, the birds, was just slightly not significant, so marginally significant. But we translate this into percentage values, no? So the absence of birds and bats in our area leads to a loss of cacao of 1%. 1/3 of the cacao is lost, which is a tremendous result we hadn't expected. And when you translate that to the market price, that means that in the absence of birds and bats, $730 2008, so it's much more now, I lost. Birds and bats are absent on every single hectare of cacao on every single year of growing it. And Indonesia, with 1.5 million hectare cacao in that time, this means that this is a $1 billion service. And you know well here, so you know how economically relevant this is, especially for the smallholder farmers. And we see this not only with the final bean result, which you see more or less here, we see this in the whole cacao life cycle. So we see the number of fruit was reduced, the number of flowers was reduced. But we don't see that this is coming through the effects of the main pests, Conopomorpha gramineae, and Xylella, not Xylella fasciosus, the olive pest, Hemiptera species, and not through the leaf herbivory. So this is also really interesting that this we didn't assume. We think that the pollination of the fruit of the flowers is affected, and also pollination of cacao is still an unsolved puzzle. Imagine such a huge cash crop the industries are interested in, and we don't know exactly who's the pollinator. We know it's some kind of mixed pollination, but we're not able to targetedly manage cacao pollinators yet, for example. We also see that not only the yield was reduced, but the number of, for example, leaf-eating insects, so potentially damaging insects from a farmer perspective, beetles and locusts such as grasshoppers, they go up a lot. But not only the leaf-eating insects, but also ants and spiders, which are predators themselves. So here you have birds that are lost, and other trophic systems are increasing, like ants and spiders, so making it a little bit more complex. And so we see this multi-trophic interactions. In total, we looked at almost like 47,000 individuals from 16 different orders of insects and 65 different. I don't go into these details in the paper that was published a long time ago, 10 years ago, no? So we see this multi-trophic interactions effects on flower survival and pollination. So potentially these flower herbivores are affected by these top-down effects. So in summary, we find birds and bats contribute a lot to the yield, to the arthropod community that increased in average by 50%, while the yield was decreasing by 30%, and probably to the effects on the flowers, which has a tremendous economic impact. But then, of course, we were super excited to ask region. My colleague Daniel Karp in the US was studying the effects of warblers on the coffee berry borer pest global cash crop, and he found that the warblers are reducing the main pest, and this is also worth $310 on every single hectare and year. We did that in parallel, without knowing of each other, and then we met at the conference ATPC, and then we were really surprised, and then we published our papers in the same week in the same journal. It's really funny. Or in Thailand, we see that bats reduce plant hoppers in a way that is saving the farmers like 2,900 tons of rice per year, the contribution of bats to pest control. And this knowledge is really critical for more targeted management of the farms, more sustainable management, a lot of yield, a lot of money, but of course we can also conserve the biodiversity that sustains a functioning ecosystem that we should not manipulate too much. In the end, we will not be able to take over all the tasks of biodiversity. You know, when you think of area pollination, because the natural pollinators are gone by now. And then I was talking about implementation. It was very important for us to take this evidence into practice. So I make this short, although this could be like a day seminar, but we were working not only in the project or after the project with the local farmer community, but actually monthly. We got in touch with the local farmer community, did monthly workshops, and not only published the paper results that I've been showing you, it's more or less only the tip of the iceberg, in scientific journals, in English, you know, behind paywalls with a very difficult language. But it was very important for us to create a team of, in this case, only cacao farmers, so people who have a strong interest behind this kind of research, who inspired us a lot, who taught me a lot about the traditional land uses, the plants growing on the farms. So it was like a mutual exchange. And in the end, we did not only have the publications, but we wrote this book together. It's below, and I give it to you so that you can have a little look at it. And this connection, this communication resulted in, so I basically did what I have in mind as a scientist, as a biologist, and I was asking the local communities what they think of these mission and idea. And you can imagine they were all really supportive and very welcoming, but they also added their own very questions they had. So for example, they were asking, okay, it's nice, we support biodiversity. Of course, we want to conserve biodiversity, but so we have to be focused, and we cannot conserve every bird and bat species. But if you tell us which species we can focus on, then maybe we can do this and we want to do this. And this is what I mean in the beginning with finding a way for implementation that actually works for the people and will be accepted. And this also needs like a continuous presence, communication and exchange, and not only one directional presentations. So we created our own side study for this question. Basically, we did dummy caterpillars, which work really well for birds. So we created the standard caterpillar of the area. Insect data, all the larvae data that we had of caterpillars, we took like what is the average size and diameter of a caterpillar, and here you see the standard caterpillar of the area made by plasticine. So like Play-Doh. You put it on the leaves, and then for birds it works really well because birds arrive on the leaves and they will pick on everything they think it's food. They will pick before they think. They will not investigate long time. So you can identify the mark of their bill, the attempt to kill the fake caterpillar on the caterpillar. So you can quantify somehow attacks, birds attacks, and like how much pressure they put on the caterpillars, for example, in the system. Cannot do this for bats or other mammals because they're a little bit too smart. They investigate before they eat it. But for birds, really well. And so we found that from this whole bird community, species we found in the area like these, and out of them more than 50 insect-eating ones, what you see often. And only one single species, the lemon-bellied white-eye, Zosterops chloris, was significantly related to the sum of the predation marks we found on the caterpillars. So we could tell the farmers, this is a bird we could focus on. And the good thing, this is the most abundant species in the area, so everybody knows it. Everybody has seen it because you see it all the time. And this also contributes to a new understanding in ecology that in times of biodiversity decline, the concern is not only about losing species, but losing numbers of species, because sometimes it's not a species community contributing to a service, but maybe the abundant species. And we're not only losing many different kinds of bird species, in these different species, we're sometimes losing enormously high numbers. So there are single species that are kind of crashing, and we have to pay more attention to this, obviously. Yeah, just as a side, very quickly, we also answered a lot of questions in these workshops, how to find optimal shade management. Here we were relating to previous studies that find that intermediate levels of shade, so like 40–50% of shade, seem to be a really good compromise between conservation and land use. And we also found that by a follow-up study, we did a global review. I have a website, bearmas.com, and there you find all these different publications. We have like 25 only from this data set. And then in the end, it was really important for us to create this book, which is not written only, not for farmers, the farmers. So the farmers were the reviewers of this book. They told us what they want to have inside this book and what they don't want to have inside this book. And here you see the hard copy, but you can freely download it on my website. You simply go on my website, you see like a publication and press, and then you just search for this book, which was published in 2018. So it took 4 years of layouting. We distributed like the pirate copy of it 4 years before in 2014. Back to the question, is this transferable to other regions? We made a global review of the literature. I mentioned to you, I was working in Central Sulawesi. And the time I started, there was sometimes not even electricity. So I was really focusing on the research. I was in the field all the time. And then after years, I come to my first international conference, meet Daniel Karp, who is working on the coffee berry borer. And Daniel and I say like, wow, we have to see who else is there. What else is there? And we did this global review, and we found only 32 studies in the whole world looking at this. When you imagine the size of the world, it's like a really special field, but so important in only 6 countries. And look, like Southeast Asia, completely underrepresented. The whole continent of Africa, not a single study back in the time, a few years ago. This was published in Biological Reviews, and out of this big review paper, highlight just things. Here you see a global map with the realms, And you see in each of the biological realms, you see two pie charts. The right one always represents birds in this realm, and the left one always the bats. And I want you to focus on how much red color you see. So this is the proportion of birds on the right or bats on the left that is eating insects in the world. So imagine this potential for pest control, understand better the effect of birds and bats eating insects, how we can manage them. But just looking at the red color, no? We also see when we look at the log response ratio, so we look statistically at these 32 different studies, we see that either only bats or only birds or birds and bats together excluded suppress arthropods, herbivores, ants, and spiders in different systems such as cacao, coffee, forest, mixed fruit markets. So this is everything we can cover in this review. In most of the cases, with very few exceptions, the arthropods are suppressed. So strong effects on pest control. And we see that some interactions, such for example, the ants here, very evident, are completely understudied. We can say it's very interesting, but maybe not enough yet. This whole approach of experimental field exclosures is something I'm very much into. So we repeated that in other parts of the world, and with some colleagues, beyond the review that you just saw in the tropics, we made a review of this approach also for temperate regions. So we were looking at all kinds of different exclosures in the tropics. Here you see coffee, cacao, but also we did this review some years later, 2018, for walnut and alfalfa studies. And we give in this paper, so if you're interested in any exclosures, feel free to contact us, but also see the paper where we provide a lot of insights how I see make the mistakes that all of us did again, and yeah, save more time and for better research. Here, yeah, and what we also did for the first time in this next review published in 2018 is that for all these studies we used one unified calculation method to, for the first time, be able to compare these economic impacts, because in different studies they have been calculated in very different ways. So we took together all these 30 studies and finally could apply one calculation approach to see the tremendous economic impacts. And this is really important to communicate with policymakers and provide them with something that is already comparable in a way. But still, we always see that we have a lot of knowledge gaps in this field. So we also did some power analysis, which is basically a really, really nice analysis you can do when you have evidence from previous experiments. You can optimize your experiments and for example, how many farms do I have to choose to have statistical power? How many times I have to go to the field to have the statistical power to have a scientific result that can be repeated, no? What we all want as scientists. Here we found it's approximately 6 farms only, maybe only 10 harvests, not the 20, and we did 28 here, and we had 15 farms. So you can imagine we maybe could have saved a lot of time and money. We couldn't in the past because we didn't have this kind of analysis, but now we have it, and in the future we can save a lot, no? So then we transferred these approaches mainly to Peru and also to Africa. Our new projects in Peru are focusing on highland versus lowland cacao, the genetic differences. We now study cacao origin, and also in the projects in Africa, particularly Cameroon, we look at meta-barcoding. So now we also do genetic analysis of bird and bat poop. And we can not only see like the indirect effects on the arthropod community and the yield, but actually which species is eating which species, which is super exciting because now this DNA analysis has become more affordable. We also look at seasonal and shade effects. We have several PhDs there. I highly encourage you to look at these fresh papers, for example, of Carolina Ocampo-Areza, who studied the complexity of bird and bat contributions in the tropical dry forests of Peru, and finds that these are very different systems from the tropical wet forests we, for example, find here. Then Justine Fanzingale, she was looking at the pollination services in native cacao plantations on the native origin. And as I mentioned to you, it's a very complex topic. We had 2 study areas in Peru that required a lot of exhausting traveling and like a lot of commitment of these 2 female PhDs, what we are really proud of. And just you see, for example, in the south and in the north of Peru, she finds really different pollinators. For this, she had to glue thousands of flowers and then to analyze the pollinators under the microscope. And she did a lot of hand pollination too. And here, just give a brief insight. What else did we do? So we started doing a lot of questionnaires too. So I did years of training how to create a social ecological study, how to ask people questions properly, different stakeholders, and how to analyze these questions. So to make responses quantifiable and to get results. For example, we did the largest study available to date in Germany and in Austria, asking farmers, shown in green, and scientists, how important they think, for example, ecosystem services are in agricultural production. And here you see that the scientists are all on the right. They all are very close to the highest, very important, while the farmers are more in the neutral area, important, less important areas. But the education of the farmers makes a big difference. So farmers with higher education are more close to the opinion of scientists. And this does tell us mainly that communication is really key in the implementation, because when we are on the same page, when we share the same information, and not just come from, 2 quite different sides and sit on the table and that's it. But if we try to develop a communication over a longer time, we can maybe agree more on a reality that is a common reality and don't have different realities on the same system, which is probably creating the knowing-doing gap that we have. We also see how they appreciate different kind of information. And here they see that scientific articles and scientific presentations are the least appreciated by farmers. It's not surprising if we have the articles behind the paywalls in a very not accessible language, but it's something that we have to show to convince, the the policymakers that we have to overcome this gap, because scientific evidence is often trapped in the bubble of the publication system and it's not coming to reality. So, and we, as conservationists, we really have to catch up in time and cannot afford to make studies, and then we are told by policymakers they may be outdated, and then we have to repeat the same study to have newer evidence. We don't have that time anymore. We never had it, actually, no? Then 2 new projects. Now we have a 3rd region in Peru, in the very north, in the Amazon basin, so in the jungle, really in the hotspot where the cacao actually comes from. Very exciting. So here you see us last year in summer on the boat, our 2 new PhDs, Blanca and Pablo, with Carolina, who is not longer a PhD, but a postdoc now. I became a new PI in the project, so we kind of grow together. We again make the exclosures here, of course. We do a lot of canopy fogging. We do a lot of farmer workshops. So what you saw before, we continue with very nice stakeholders in the area, with a nice design that takes into account the genetic diversity of cacao and how genetic diversity is affecting biodiversity. We are very excited about this too. And then another new project that we have, I had here some publications, recent ones. So you see how broad the topics are we're working on. We work on the social ecological benefits of fine flavor cacao in its center of origin, published really new maps of the genetic origin and the genetic development of cacao and how this is related to biodiversity and ecosystem services. So for 12 years now, I get deeper and deeper in the world of cacao. We also publish now the results of the Afrotropical communities. So I'm very proud to be able to be part of these amazing teams of scientists that contribute with the first studies from the continent of Africa, because this is highly needed. And there we see the story is really complex as well. And then also very happy that I can grow my network in agroecological policy, especially in Europe, be part of the Agrobiodiversity Congress and really develop hands-on approaches with policymakers how to implement this evidence. Then we have this project so after all these years, after more than 10 years, I started working at another agroforestry system, and now we study also olive trees. And I have to say I fell in love with this area completely. Took me years of preparation, and now we study birds, bats, ants and spiders, olive, fly and moth, with a seasonal effect in Italy. So we look at the landscape scale, the local farm scale. We have similar designs, but highly optimized due to the 12 years of experience that we have. And now we are able to take all this data from before, and we are developing an app that gives farmers and policymakers the idea of the biological potential of farms and landscapes, and with remote sensing. And that also gives them indication what exactly they have to do, like focus on pollination, pest control, plant management, or another nutrient management. There we work with many different countries and partners, as you can imagine. And the Super Fresh project, we just know like 2 or 3 weeks we have now, and I also always wanted to do this. It's called Sounds Wild. It will be done by the fantastic Rim Nuoya as a PhD in my team, and it combines biological conservation, awareness training with schools and arts. So finally, we're integrating a lot of arts. I believe it's important not only to change mind through facts, but also change through the heart, emotional approach. At least this is something I'm good at. And so we choose 70 to 80 bird and bat target species for Austria. We focus on common and very endangered species. And then we give more than 150 workshops over 2 years in all the different of Austria in the low, medium, and high levels between 6 and 18 years. And then we built bat recorders. They built their own bat recorders because my PhD Rim knows how to do this. The one device is so she can teach children how to build their own recorder for bats in like half an hour. It's amazing. And then they have their own one. Then we go out together with them. They use their own recorder to record bats. And then they use the phone. There's a really good app from Smithsonian, from Corner Lab for bird identification. You all have to install it. It's called BirdNet. Go out. It's really, really good. So we go out with the school children and their teachers, and they have a little competition. They are little groups, and we select who sees more birds and bats, who can record more in that time to motivate them. We do this with more than 100 schools, so we reach like 3,000 plus pupils and their teachers and families directly. And then in the summer holiday that you have in Austria, we have a creative competition for everybody in the country. And everybody can send in via our webpage, whatever, a picture, a song, a TikTok, Instagram, whatever they want. We don't do any restrictions because it's about creativity, but just it has to be about one of these 70 or 80 bird species, bird and bat, in action. So one of these species, which we all have on the website, doing something typical, eating something typical, being somewhere typical, whatever. And then it will be eligible for the contest, for the small little big ones, older ones. And we have amazing prizes that are sponsored. So we are so proud of this project and very, very excited to do this. This is like a new world I'm entering. And I'm so happy to see the thousands of sendings of the school children about these species. We have the hope, because we have a big journalistic network, that we will talk more about birds and bats in the next years, and also that these creative contribution of the children can touch the heart of the people who make decisions, at least the parents. So that's it. I think I was talking too much sometimes in between, but however, I hope you have many questions and look forward to your questions, and thank you so much for your attention.
Wow. Thank you so much. That's very inspiring. This ini saya mungkin berkomentar sedikit nih. Jadi mohon maaf, sorry I speak in bahasa Indonesia.
Tidak apa-apa.
Jadi kita hari ini kita belajar banyak sekali ya dari Mbak Bea ini. Pertama dari desain ya, bagaimana dia mendesainnya, yang ada enclosure-nya, dibuka, ditutup. Bayangkan setiap hari selama 2 tahun berturut-turut. Itu suatu pekerjaan yang luar biasa. Harus bekerja sama juga tentunya dengan masyarakat setempat. Kemudian yang kedua, kita melihat bagaimana evolusi perkembangan pemikiran dan ide-ide ya. Dari yang kecil kemudian nambah akhirnya sampai segini banyaknya ya. Jadi barangkali kalau kalian Ibu dan Bapak mulainya dari kecil memang begitu awalnya ya, tapi kemudian nambah lagi ya. Kemudian kita nomor 3 tadi lihat dari lokal menjadi global. Kalau kita Bea dulu bekerjanya di Lorelindo National Park ya, Lorelindo National Park. Kemudian sekarang sudah mendunia ya. Tentunya ini juga harus ada yang mulai dari kecil kemudian jadi yang besar. Poin yang lain saya lihat ya, kita ini selalu susah melakukan komunikasi ya kepada orang-orang yang di luar kaum saintis ya, scientific community ya. Jadi kalau kita berbicara kepada petani ya, tentunya ya harus pakai bahasa petani begitu, tidak bisa pakai alfa sama dengan sekian-sekian, nanti pusing dia aja gitu. Jadi ini juga menjadi sesuatu yang kita harus pelajari dan Bea sudah melakukannya. Maaf nih saya bicara agak cepat supaya lebih cepat juga ya. Kemudian tadi ada revenue, urusannya dengan ternyata UUD juga ini ya, urusannya dengan revenue, dengan dana ya, dengan uang ya yang datang. Kalau jadi dari penelitian ini dibuktikan bahwa kalau tidak ada burung atau burung berkurang, satwa berkurang bats ya, kelelawar berkurang, serangga berkurang, ternyata hasilnya juga berkurang ya. Dan dulu-dulu mungkin terjadi tapi kita tidak pernah melakukan kuantifikasi ya. Kemudian tadi yang terakhir kita juga mendengarkan bahwa ini semua sebetulnya urusannya dengan konservasi. Kebetulan kita ini kan berada di departemen yang berurusan dengan konservasi ya. Jadi jangan dikira bahwa makhluk-makhluk kecil, serangganya kebetulan ada ahli serangga juga ya. Serangga, burung yang kecil-kecil tadi itu tidak bermanfaat ya. Ternyata kalau tidak ada spesies-spesies itu langsung bermasalah ya. Dan itu mengarahkan juga kepada awareness. Ada program awareness ya yang kemudian kepikir, oh iya bagaimana kalau kita bisa membuat ini, membuat itu. Dan semua itu adalah dari suatu penelitian yang mungkin kita kira kecil, tapi kemudian menjadi kompleks seperti ini. So thank you so much, that is very, very inspiring and hopefully we all can learn, I think we all already learn ya, many things from your research and from your journey of your research ya. Again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ibu dan Bapak, selanjutnya kita masuk kepada Q&A. Ini ada Bu Rita yang sudah ngacung. Berikutnya silahkan. Sementara itu bagi yang ada di Zoom, mohon nanti bisa langsung nulis di chat atau bisa tunjuk tangan gitu ya. Sesudah nanti selesai di ruangan ini, nanti akan kami berikan kesempatan untuk teman-teman yang berada di Zoom. Bu Rita, kan kebetulan saya tahu namanya tapi perlu disampaikan lagi. Silahkan Ibu Rita.
Hello Ibu Bea, my name is Rita. I'm from KWT, now in the PhD program.
Conservation.
It's so happy for me to see how you work. Yeah, I mean, you keep doing research. Say maybe we were on more or less on the same time. But then now you are, like Bu Ani said, it's already global person. I think that's something that we all need to learn from you. Yeah. The second thing is I would like you to highlight about the novelty. If you can explain, just mention. What is the biggest novelty from your research? And are those novelty by design or you do it by doing? I was just wondering because I'm on that faster. I have to write my dissertation, my proposals, and people keep asking me, right, what is your novelty? What is your or you have to design the novelty?
Thank you very much. Wonderful question. Thank you very much for the kind feedback. And yeah, for this very good question. The novelty is like different, no, from different perspectives, I would say. So when you think again of the different stakeholders, we can have the scientists, the policymakers, and again, people from different backgrounds, from different countries, maybe they consider different aspects of one system, maybe different, important, and on a different level of novelty. So I believe it's very important to know what you can create, what is your individual profile, what you're good at it, and always stick with it. So I tried out definitely different things, but what I always wanted and what was very clear to me is that there are like communication issues in conservation of biodiversity, and I had like this big motivation and interest to get better at communication and really see results. You also said in the beginning, like success or whatever, was like, for me, it's the main success is still being in academia, still being in science. This presentation may seem like, you know, a straight road, always success. And I have to say really honestly to everybody, it's not like that. Also not in Europe. And I know I have a huge privilege, like from, you know, what I could do, how I could travel to different universities, get scholarships that we have in Germany or in Austria. Also, I worked a lot for it, but I know like I'm very aware, or I try to be as aware as I can of the privilege. And then there's a lot of endurance that I had to have, and a lot of belief and stubbornness to stay. So in between these things that you see here, I've been in conservation practice, I've worked in journalism and outside science, which I don't regret. I'm sorry that we don't have a system that is able to keep excellent and the most motivated people, because I often see them leaving. I especially see diversity leaving a lot in our field. So I see, for example, that there's a very narrow profile that is promoted sometimes. And you may all have heard about the discussion about the successful white Western man. And we try to overcome this. You see at this table, we're clearly overcoming it, but still not enough. No, maybe when we have time later, I don't want to do it now because I want to give space to the questions, but I could present something on that later if there's interest. Otherwise, you can see it on the website. So the point is, to summarize, the road is not easy. It's not a straight road. I have to be very honest about that. But I believe if you, sounds cheesy, but if you believe in yourself and you know you have something to offer, unique profile, always focus on your uniqueness. And this is the novelty. But know the literature, no? Like, it's very important also that we acknowledge the work that has been done. So these combinations, you have to be knowledgeable. So as a scientist, the most important thing that you do every day is reading. Reading the other literature and knowing, reading on the phone, reading papers, reading books. The knowledge is what we live from. And then the novelty is what we make out of the knowledge. And here I recommend you to listen to what you really want and always follow this path. And then I end and always maybe have a plan B, because my plan Bs made me survive. I sometimes needed them for a while, and then I could go back to plan A. To be that honest. Yeah. Do you agree? What do you say, Dami? What? Yeah, perfect.
100%.
Yes, saying 100%. Yeah.
Very, very good advice indeed. Okay, next, is there any other questions from this floor, from this room? Ada yang bertanya lagi? Boleh pakai bahasa Indonesia juga, boleh pakai bahasa Inggris.
Boleh sekali.
Jerman juga boleh ya.
Jerman juga boleh.
Di chat juga ada ya.
Nah, kalau tidak ada,
Oh, ada yang angkat tangan.
Ada
Oke.
banyak di chat.
kalau di ruangan ini tidak ada, boleh nanti lanjut lagi. Tapi sekarang kita beralih kepada Zoom room. Ini ada Muhammad Iqbal kah yang bertanya? Bagaimana? Langsung saja. Bapak atau Mas Iqbal, mangga silakan. Ada open mic atau apa nih?
Oh, itu deh.
Oh iya, silakan. Mangga.
Masih mute, Pak.
Bapak, kami belum mendengar suara Bapak. Apakah Bapak termute?
Thank you,
Enggak,
Bu.
Pak.
Well, I would like to ask, do you also measure the distance between the treated cacao to the nearest natural forest? Because perhaps those birds and bats come from the natural forest. There might be some relations or to that. Thank you.
Terima kasih, Pak Iqbal.
Thank you very much. It's a very good question. And yeah, we did that indeed a lot and analyzed this a lot. And we do find, you maybe remember the yellow bird that I showed, like the one contributing the most, the yellow-bellied white-eye. And we see the contribution of that bird is strongest the closer it is to a primary forest. And we also see that for the diversity of the community. So we see that the cacao farms benefit a lot from forest proximity. So the forest, as was saying, is indeed serving as a source of biodiversity and associated ecosystem services. So we have to care very well about that source.
So this is another good reason why we still need primary forest, right?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Terima kasih, Pak Iqbal.
Yeah,
Any other questions from the chat, from the Zoom room?
I saw many questions before, no?
Okay.
Maybe we scroll all the way up.
Yes.
Start with the first one. Silakan scroll di atas.
Dari atas. Yeah, maybe you can stand from over there so you can directly answer the questions. Thank
So Q&A rush. So itu di paling atas atau belum?
Sudah ke atas.
Sudah tadi yang Pak.
Itu bisa naik?
Dari awal.
Oke. Terima kasih. Jadi mana? Is coffee good companion tree with cacao? Its effect to animal habitat. Thank you. Coffee and cacao, it's difficult for the harvesting, but in general, the idea is really good. So intercropping is a very interesting case. In Sulawesi, in our study area, where should I talk to you? And in the Sulawesi, in our study area, actually, we saw a lot of combination of cacao and vanilla, which is interesting. And I know that this is also done increasingly in Mexico now. And then in general, the intercropping, the combination with a high diversity of shade trees seems very interesting. And we do that now in Peru. And I didn't have enough time to also add this to my PhD, but I have some data indicating that some shade trees in particular help the birds, the insect-eating birds a lot. In my case, these were citrus trees, like the small oranges, and avocado trees, alpucat. And they were associated, there's like a significant correlation between the occurrence of insectivorous birds and these trees. But I have to say, we have to treat these results with caution because it was like a side result from my data set. It was not designed to study only this question, but it's really interesting. And now we focus on this with a particular design in Peru. And also when we think of for these smallholder systems, no, if we think of fruiting trees as a potential secondary income that also promotes biodiversity, it's really interesting. Next one, do you also measure distance from plantation to natural forest? I just answered that one.
Yes.
Then do you see any wild silkworm pests in all cacao plantations you have worked on? For example, Agricola Trifenestrata attacks atlas. What kind of treatment used for these and other pests control? It's a very specific question. that specifically, we didn't focus on silkworm and that species, but I can provide a more general answer. For the treatment, from our experience, I would highlight two things. One is that the input of agrochemicals, such as insecticides, herbicides, fertilizers, is affecting some pests in the system, but the problem is it's also affecting all the beneficial insects, like ants and spiders. So the manipulation of the system is not really targeted in most cases, and so it's not really a good management, how we do it now. And the same counts for biodiversity-friendly management or biological management that we think of. That the problem is that often, like, it's very difficult to look at the whole system. And it also has to do sometimes with the limited time that we have, the limited funding that we have, and field work, ecological field work. So these are the two first points that come to my mind when I think of insect management in these kind of systems. That we have to question the conventional approaches a lot, and that we need to invest much more into the ecological approaches. And both have like their shortcomings now. And we should not continue these traditions of this kind of management for sure. And we saw in the presentation that there's a lot of potential to approach the management from really different angles. So in Europe, you have a saying, like 1,000 different ways lead to Rome. And this is, there's not the one correct way, maybe also relating to the question before. There's so many ways leading to a solution, but the old way we have been going, maybe not, as we see. When you did the research, did you see the disease caused by the cacao plant? What do you mean? Because until now, the disease found in cacao plants cannot be prevented by these people. Maybe you can provide a solution or suggestion for this improvement. It's partly in my previous answer, I would say. And yeah, we focused, of course, a lot on the diseases. We focused on the whole arthropod community. Here, the most abundant ones, the ones with the highest biomass. And of course, we focused a lot on the main diseases that I mentioned before. So how can I respond to the question more satisfactorily? I think I pretty much covered it with the previous answer. Then another question says, my concern is the importance of biodiversity in ecosystem service for ecological economic systems and sustainability as a part of national accounting systems. What do you think? Can modern economic systems simultaneously grow at the expense of the biodiversity in ecosystems? Yes. So we see that we actually need to do this in order to not overexploit the resources that we have to an extent where we cannot recognize any of the system anymore, frankly. So in the moment, we're altering ecosystem services in such a strong way that we arrived at a point where we cannot predict the future anymore, because we were able for a longer time, when we had the tools, to predict the future quite reliably. So when you look at, for example, climate change studies that are 70, 80 years old even, you see that they did a pretty good estimate of what will be happening with ecosystems due to climate warming, for example. Pretty good idea. Of course, we have a lot of lacking data in some regions, but now you see a growing body of literature. So you see more and more experts highlighting that their predictions become less stable, less reliable, because of the altered interactions. In ecology, you would say we reach many different tipping points. So when we lose, for example, an amount of species that is so high that this certain function is lost, and the ecosystem is adapting in a way we can't predict anymore. So I would respond this to the question that we need to do this. The Sustainable Development Goals are for us a really vital questions, and sustainability means we have to combine ecology, society, and economy. We have to integrate it. Sitting together is not enough. We have to integrate it really. That these three pillars have to become like one family, no, and not three pillars that are separated. Have you ever recommended this research to Indonesian government plantations that have cacao trees, for example, PTPN, for better management? The case of cacao plantation Banyuwangi in East Java, cacao trees were cut down and replaced with sugarcane. Yeah, one of the impacts, floods from the government plantations. Yes, we are a lot in exchange. For example, not with this particular institute, because the diversity of institutions is huge. But what's really surprising also to me, when I was 24 or so, it was the year, no, I was older. It was the year 2014. No, I was 28. But I was invited to the negotiations of the Nagoya Protocol in South Korea at the CPD, where more than 1,000 people, Ibu Ayen, they invited me, 28-year-old person, because they obviously couldn't find someone better to talk about stakeholder communication. I was really surprised by this. So there's really a gap and a huge need for this kind of communication. We do as good as we can, but we need hundreds of people to do this. Yeah. It's the last question. Raya? Okay.
Ada lagi kah? Pertanyaan di bawah.
Terima kasih banyak.
Okay, I think we already finished with all of the questions from the Zoom. Is there any other question from this room? Otherwise, then, okay, that's the last one. Go ahead. Yes.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Hawa, and actually I'm more familiar with palm oil case. And for that, my question is, I heard about the idea for the palm oil plantation to have like 3 islands, trade between palm oil. And then what do you think about that? I mean, like, it is preferred than just like only of plantations and in the periphery of primary forest, or we can plant trees between, making 3 islands between the cash crops. Yeah, maybe you can your opinion with your case with cacao plantations. Yeah. And then the second one is I think it is interesting that your research is about the species specific roles in the ecosystems, but we know that the government tend to see, yeah, we can just protect the habitats, like just the forest. We don't have to think about the species specific with growth. And what do you think about what is let's say the importance of your research if it is compared to the landscape like land approach?
Yeah.
Do you catch what I mean?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. 2 very good questions. The first one, to repeat briefly, is you basically say, shall we have larger areas of plantation and farm, or shall we have like more like patches?
Yeah.
No? And this is the classical, like for decades ongoing debate on land sparing or sharing, basically. So you find that in this famous debate, for example. And this pretty much depends, as we see. So usually you don't have like a 0 or 1 answer. There's something in between, and what is in between is really important to consider. For example, the land use history, because very clearly it doesn't make sense to make a landscape that is traditionally for a long time like patchily organized and managed, to transform it in a land sparing landscape, because that change would be really big for that landscape. So these changes need to go on gradually, usually, and need to be followed by investigation. So I actually cannot respond for your system. In our case, we and for the taxa that we observe and for the system that we look at, we find definitely like a land sharing approach really important. So we integrate agriculture. But there you really have to take into account that patches need to be of different sizes too. Connectivity is always key like when we think of the most basic ecological concepts like meta-population theory, we know we need connectivity. Otherwise, the genes cannot grow, stay and be healthy. So, and this one is, and you can talk long time. I have lectures about land sparing sharing, but what I find really interesting to highlight 2 points is we often talk about land sparing because we assume, or it's often communicated, we have more people in the future on the planet and we need more food. And what we all need to know is that we already produce more than enough calories for people for like the next decades. But we have a lot of loss in between. Like we're wasting, like throwing away the calories through inefficient production systems, meat consumption, water waste, and so on. So we already produce like more than 4,700 calories per capita per head. And we need around 2,000, 2,200 in average. So we can have double as many people like calorie wise, but not like from what we produce, we only have like we lose much more than the half of it now. This is the one thing that is assumed about land sparing that is actually with the evidence not so true. And the other one is very important to highlight always the quality. Yeah, like no approach is really worthwhile when you don't look a lot on the quality. Again, I want to emphasize the importance of diversity of perspective of people for our whole progress as a community, as a society, you know. And when we think about woman quota, like I always have to talk about that too. I'm a DEI ambassador, and like I often get the response, "How about the woman quota?" And yeah, and our institute is really good because we have 50% women. And a good transition to your next question. So don't be afraid. I still have it in mind, but it's about the quality. No, it's not about I have 5 women in a team of 10 people. It's about the question, what are these women doing? And if they're bringing the coffee and doing the teaching and doing the administration, it's not a quality. Then it's not, it's just a quantity. It's just a number, but not quality that will change the science. They need to have equal opportunities. So they contribute as much, everybody contributes as much as everybody else to the big grants, to the money, to the fame. And this brings me to your second question about, it's also about quality. You say the government often doesn't care about species in the forest, but just the habitat. Let's protect the forest. And it's maybe not the same if we do it here or there, no? And this is what you mean. And here the key argument is the functional diversity. And we see some changes. We see, for example, that REDD assessment some years ago, you know that much better than me, we're looking at species numbers a lot. Then we saw increasing evidence in the science that when we look at changes on the landscape scale for species communities. So for example, we look how a community is responding to many years of landscape change. And we see we don't see any change in the numbers of the species because we have biotic homogenization going on. That means the endemic forest species are replaced by more common open land species. When we look at species numbers, we don't see a difference. We have a huge discussion now going on in Austria because also biotic homogenization that is not well communicated to the policymakers. So now there's a big farmer discussion around, they say like the Hallman study, the famous one, like we're not losing so many insects, we have as much species, and no one talks about the functional quality of these species. This is happening increasingly, but we need much more of this. The problem is not that we don't know, like we know really well about this. So we have, I think that's too, but we should focus on the better communication of that evidence, what I said before. We have so much highly valuable evidence that we need to put and communicate fast. Otherwise, we have to do it again, because then they will simply say it's outdated and make us do it again. So we really have to focus that what we have now, we communicate really well. Otherwise, we're losing time. And there I'm really still the conservationist by heart, and I get really nervous. Yeah. So, yeah.
Okay, terima kasih. So thank you very much. Thank you again, Dea, and terima kasih kepada Ibu dan Bapak yang berada di ruangan ini dan juga berada di ruangan Zoom. Hari ini kita sudah banyak sekali belajar, saya tidak Rasanya saya sudah tidak bisa lagi menyimpulkan apa yang hari ini kita pelajari ya, banyak sekali ya. Dari start ekologinya sampai kepada policy, sampai kepada program-programnya, hari ini kita belajar semuanya. Dan mudah-mudahan ini membuat kita terinspirasi ya, sehingga Ibu dan Bapak, kalian semua termasuk kami ya Bu, dengan Bu Dami ini bisa melakukan sesuatu hal yang lebih penting lagi ke masa depan, quality yang penting ya. Jadi kalau perempuan ini hanya kurang ya, tapi kalau menjadi PI seperti BA ini menjadi sangat-sangat bermanfaat ya. Tapi sebelum kita akhiri, rasanya ada sesuatu ya.
Ya, jadi tadi kan ada bukunya Bea yang diputar ya. Oke, nah itu saya memberikan sesuatu pada Bea. Kami ada sedikit hadiah.
So this is like a token for appreciation to them. You can of course you can I found a nice picture over there. Jangan lupa di foto.
So the book that you
Distribute here.
we read that book. So I want to introduce this. These are the CRC.
Boleh pinjam bukunya tadi?
CRC people.
Pleasure.
Lagi di situ.
Oke.
So I'd like to introduce Rizky and then also Bona and two students here who are doing the CRC efforts. And from this book we read, and then we thought we have a Jambi, our work in Jambi, and we can imitate
See
this.
Now this is a good impact ya.
It's a good
Already.
impact, yes. So
That's
now,
amazing.
but
I cried.
this is Indonesian only. This is English and Indonesia. This is Indonesian only.
It's amazing.
And Bu Ani gave a foreword in this book. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's amazing. Yeah, thank you. Wow.
We also have this is all the research from the efforts. This is the ends, and
Yes.
this is the bureau. So maybe
I love this.
this is all for you.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Okay, terima kasih.
Terima kasih banyak.
Oke. Wow. Tidak. Thank you. See, so because of your book, Ibu Dami produce a book just because of your inspiration.
But I really have to say that again. I have to emphasize everything you see is not possible without the team efforts.
Yes.
And what I learned from you and the support I got from you. You know, it was difficult, like long time ago. You know exactly that no one of us could have done anything without the support of you and your colleagues. We could have done nothing here. And thank you so much.
This is very good cooperation in here. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so with that, I would like to conclude our session for today, our meeting for today. And again, thank you very much. Thank you, Bea. Thank you, everybody. Apa lagi? Kita nggak boleh. Oh, ya. Oke, yang dari
Zoom juga.
Yang dari Zoom, could you please activate your camera so you can see your beautiful faces?
Okay.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
This is so Indonesian. We like to take pictures.
Okay. Shall we take picture taken now? Okay. Okay. First screen. Yes. 1, 2, 3. Next screen, please.
We're so small. But the spirit.
Okay.
Next screen.
Okay.